Welcome back, enthusiasts. We've just had the Season 8 campfire. They've dropped the patch notes. So I've taken some high-level notes of the bits that I thought were important, and I'm going to run through those. I'll link in the description of this presentation and the link to the patch notes on the Blizzard website so you can read them at your own leisure. So we've got a lot to get through. Let's just get on with this, and here we go. So starting off, one of the main things of the Season 8 theme is the fact that they're overhauling the Lair Boss mechanics. And one of the issues on the PTR was that Belial, who's meant to be the top tier boss, even above Duriel and Andariel, he was just easier. Andariel was significantly harder. She had gated mechanics. She had much more sporadic mechanics going on. And Belial, we were honestly just going in and one-shotting him. Now, that was partly because the boss powers were completely insane, so maybe that was giving us the power that we were allowing us to be able to do this. But they have said they have tremendously buffed Belial here, and that they've added extra mechanics to him, so he should be more difficult, more aspirational. So I'm looking forward to this. It means we've got a fight to look forward to that none of us particularly know exactly how it's going to go. And honestly, we've been waiting for something like that in Diablo 4 for a while. They have also tuned all of the bosses across the board, so they should feel more like the tier that they're at. So the tier 1 bosses like Uravar and Varshan and so on should feel a little bit more in line with being the first tier bosses, and then obviously Belial being at the top should be the hardest. And they say that they've removed some of the one-shot mechanics, so that should be good for a lot of people because it doesn't particularly feel great when you just get one-shots all the time. Boss materials have been reduced from their drops from elites, but they have been buffed from the activities. So I think they're trying to get us to go in and get the materials by going and doing different activities around the world, rather than just farming the elites and then just getting bucket loads of materials bosses and then just going and smashing the bosses over and over and over again. And on top of this, to back up what they're trying to do, which I think is to try and move us away from doing massive sessions of boss farming, they're trying to get it so that when you do the bosses, you get much more rewarding loot, and we'll have to see if that actually ends up being the case. But they do say that they have buffed the boss loot significantly with extra drops, two ancestral drops guaranteed for Belial, and so on and so on. So we're going to have to wait and see how that plays out when we get to it. So it all sounds good from a high level. I'm looking forward to getting in and seeing how that feels. On top of that, as we say, Belial will now drop 2 Ancestrals. Lair Bosses will now drop 50% targeted loot and 50% global loot, which means even if you don't particularly want to go and do one of the bosses, like in the past, it's still kind of rewarding to do it because you've got a chance of getting the items you wouldn't have otherwise got. So, for example, as they said in the campfire, you used to go to the Beast in the Ice to go and get the Fists of Fate gloves. And that was the only place you could target farm it, and it wouldn't drop anything else except its targeted loot pool. But now you could go and farm Lord Zir, for example, and he would have a chance in that 50% global loot to drop any of those other items you would normally go to a different boss for. As well as the 50% targeted. So this is quite a nice change because there was a situation where sometimes people would just end up with bucket loads of certain types of boss materials, but they would never use them because there was no real reason for them to do it. They didn't want any of the targeted loot, and they didn't really have any reasons to go do it. So now that they can get global loot from it, they can go farm them, and they might get the loot they want, and if not, it just gives them a reason to get them out of their inventory as well. Bosses do not require boss materials to start anymore, so you can try them over and over again until your heart's content, but you do need materials to open up the chest to get the loot at the end. They have reduced the required materials from 4 to 3, so that will make it a little bit less drooling to be able to get to the point of opening that chest. So it's every single individual person is going to require their own boss materials now. Now, this might be a point of controversy for a lot of people because in the past, you just have one set of materials and everyone would get their loot. Now it means everyone in the party will need their own boss materials, and that means everyone's going to have to farm their own. So we'll have to see what that has on the effect that has on the boss material economy. I imagine it will make them very expensive because they'll be in much higher demand. So moving on from this, Apparition Bosses, carrying on with the boss theme. This is one of the other main mechanics in the Season 8 Belial's Return upcoming season. There are 10 random bosses to go between here, and they've got this new mechanic called the Apparition Incursions, where you go and fight a lot of monsters, and then when you finish killing those, it will spawn a random boss at the end, out of that pool of 10 bosses. And when you kill that boss, it will unlock one of the basic magic powers, which you can just equip. You can have 1 as your main boss power, and you can have 3 as your modifiers. Now, that gets you going. The rest of those boss powers, the stronger ones, as you would say, they come from beating the Lair Bosses later on. But to get going, you are going to go do these and get some basic powers to get going. They've wanted to make these a bit more incentivized to do, so they've made it so it can turn into a Whisper Bounty now. So that gives you an extra benefit from doing it if you happen to do it at the time as a bounty. It requires less Spectral Ash to upgrade the skills. So if you played Season 7, you'll know that the Witch powers required you to get a resource, and as you got more of that resource, you could upgrade the power. Spectral Ash is the new resource to do the same thing for these powers in Season 8. They were quite expensive to upgrade during the PTR, so they've reduced the amount required to upgrade them, and they've also made it so Lair Bosses are going to drop you more of it, so it gives you more incentivization to go do Lair Bosses to get the Spectral Ash to be able to upgrade your powers. This all sounds good in just making it feel a little bit smoother to get from level 1 up to your Giga Chad top level on your boss powers. And these boss powers, even after the wave of nerfs they've had, they're probably still going to be quite good, honestly. Moving on, again, for the most part, as I just said, boss powers have been nerfed across the board. There's a number of nerfs that have happened individually on them. I would recommend going and looking at the patch notes or checking out my previous video, which goes over them more individually for what's changed on them. The other thing they did reveal during this campfire is that the scaling now is capped at Paragon 200 instead of 300. Now, the importance of this is, unlike the Witch powers, these boss powers do scale their power based on your level and then your Paragon level. And the fact that those went all the way up to 300 meant that once you're at Paragon 300, which for a lot of people will not be achievable, to be fair, they got really, really strong. So by capping this down at 200, they just don't scale as high anymore. But it does mean it's more achievable to get to the top amount of power from these boss powers. So it's kind of a pro and a con there, depending on how you look at it. But it does mean it solves some of the problem of them getting ridiculously overpowered. But also, as I say, it's going to make it a lot more accessible to people. So it is a nerf, but with an accessibility sort of pro in there as well. The main powers that were nerfed are the ones we were expecting, and Dariel's and Uravar's. Again, I would check out the individual things in the patch notes on my previous video. But they were the ones that were the most hit. And then Ashava's, again, I said in my previous video, and a lot of people have been picking up on this, is the one where it applies poison. It got buffed by 3 times. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous. I imagine this is going to be very strong. It may even be ridiculously overtuned. We'll have to see. So, yes, keep your eyes open for that one. If you're fancying playing a poison build, Ashava's will be very strong to start with, probably. And it may even get nerfed because they said they're going to do nerfs early on in the season now, rather than waiting to try and bring down anything that is completely broken. So, with that being said, we're going to move straight on to the classes. There's a number of things in here. I'm trying to keep this to just the very high level stuff that people would actually care about. So Spiritborn has only had a few changes, but they're quite important ones. Rushing Claw had a wave of changes in the PTR. Again, I would check out the patch notes for the full amount of changes, but the main thing you need to know that's changed from the PTR is that the damage was further increased. So everything that was using Rushing Claw will just be stronger. The next one, which particularly excites me because I've used this in a build myself, is the Zepazontek unique. And this one scales all your basic skills. Gives you double damage for basic skills, gives you basic skill damage it bakes into it, and so on and so on. They have just flat increased the damage on this, and it's a fair increase in damage by about 30 to 40%. So any builds that would use the Zepazontek will just be straight buffed from this. This is something I'm probably going to try out during the season, and there's a number of builds you could use this on. Sunbird's Gorget is the new unique that's been brought in, which takes the Storm Feathers, and it's kind of a hybrid build between Eagle and Jaguar. This is one that people tried out in the PTR and were a bit underwhelmed by it. Firstly, because it had a bug where unyielding hits was not working with it properly, one of the main damage scalers in the Spiritborn arsenal, taking armor and converting that to extra weapon damage, giving you huge damage boost. But secondly, the Storm Feathers just didn't have many ways to scale its damage. It didn't have access to the Jaguar skill damage scalers, which, to be honest, if you're building Spiritborn right now does not have access to those, it is going to be limited. They have fixed both of those by just flat increasing the damage of the Sunbird's Gorget aspects anyway. And then Storm Feathers are now going to count as Jaguar skills with this unique on as well. So that gives you access to all the Jaguar skill arsenal. And then the Unyielding Hits aspect has also been fixed, so it works with the Storm Feathers and the Eagle Primary Spirit. So all in all, the Sunbird's Gorget should be a much more usable sort of build now. Whether it will be a top tier build or mid tier build, I don't know yet. I don't think it will be bad. I just don't know if it's going to be super good without testing it, because I didn't try it in the PTI, I just heard about this. But that seems like a fairly decent wave of buffs to that there. Moving on, we've got the Barbarian. Massive buffs to Barbarian for the most part, with one major nerf at the end. Whirlwind, just buffed across the board. If you didn't think Whirlwind was going to be usable in Season 8, I imagine it's going to be very usable now. The flat damage was really increased, significant buff of about 40-50%, and the bleed damage was massively buffed by 3 times, and then it scales on your weapon damage rather than a flat damage. So it's going to be very good again. If any of you played any of the previous seasons where bleed Whirlwind barbs were crazy, this is probably going to be the case again. On top of this, Double Swing, Hammers of the Ancient, and Upheaval all had damage buffs, all had fury cost reductions, going to make them all much more usable if you choose to use those skills. And Rend also had a fury cost reduction, but no damage increase. So all in all, the whole Barbarian standard sort of skill arsenal and the core skills have all been buffed in some way. Mighty Swing is one of the main differences here. It did have its base damage reduced significantly by 4 times, but the reason for this is they say it's been compensated in bug fixes and with the new aspects that have been added, which add and the unique. So it gives a phenomenal extra amount of damage to Mighty Swing, so I guess they're just trying to compensate it there and create a slightly different playstyle with that skill. It's not one I've played, but that's what I understand from it. Steel Grasp is another skill that's just been buffed. About 60% base damage increase, and it seems like they're trying to shift the general concepts of Steel Grasp into being a multi-charge skill rather than just going in and using it once, big hit, and then doing loads of damage, but then it being on a cooldown for ages. And when I have played Barbarian, Steel Grasp can be used in many different ways to do sort of utility sort of skills for you. Grab enemies or make them vulnerable or whatever. So having more charges of this will probably be more useful than doing more damage in theory, because it's more of a support skill as opposed to your main damager. Uniques and aspects. Twin Strike's unique has had the critical strike element removed, and it's been replaced with chance for double swing to deal double damage. Now this is important. I've never used this unique, but I guess if you're going to want to play a double swing build, this may actually be usable now, because chance for double swing is an extremely powerful stat. Chance for double damage for any on your skills is very good. So might be able to use this with the double swing build now. And as specified in the campfire, the executioner's aspect has been nerfed. It's the main thing that's been nerfed on Barbarian, which is to do with the earthquakes. So the damage scaling has been decreased by about 3 times, and it's being capped to 200%. So it's going to be a lot harder to get to the cap, and on top of that, it has now been capped. Now the chances are earthquake barbs are still going to be very good. They were really good before. So it's just putting it into context. We'll have to see. Hopefully this isn't nerfing them into ground and it's just making it a bit more acceptable across the rest of the skills, making it so that earthquakes aren't just, this is the only way to play Barbarian right now because it's just that strong. But I imagine if there's a major issue, they will address it early on. Next is Druid. Druid's had a wave of buffs as well. I'm very excited for some of these myself. I quite enjoy playing a Druid, and the chances are I'll try and play one during this season. Storm Strike's had a couple of buffs. They've had it so that their Storm Strike chain has a bigger acquisition radius, so you can apply them in a bigger radius around you, and that's important because you've got the Crone Stone staff, you've got the Crone Staff, and you've also got a new aspect which will allow you to apply Storm Strike to twice as many enemies. So you're going to basically be able to just apply these Storm Strikes all across the screen, I imagine, and that's going to buff your whatever build you choose to do with it. So that should be quite cool to play, I think. Cyclone Armor, which is a really good damage reduction buff for Druids for non-physical damage. This has been buffed from 15% to 20% by base, so that is very good. That's just going to make you more tanky, easier, and that's on top of your resistances, so it does normally mean Druids are generally one of the best classes for being resistant to elemental stuff. Ravens and Poison Creeper, which are two of your companion skills, they've had humongous damage buffs. Now, I don't know if these will be usable as separate Ravens builds or Poison Creeper builds, but I imagine that people will try now because they've been buffed really a lot. Ravens was like a 3 times damage buff, and Poison Creeper's about a 40 to 50%. They're pretty large. On top of this, Earthen Might, as specified in a campfire chat, it had an extra element added to it. So while it's in effect, you're going to get 50% critical strike damage. And it can be reactivated before the effect is over after a very short period. You can't just constantly reapply it, but after a short period, you can apply it before it ends. Meaning, if you've set your build up correctly, in theory, you can keep Earthen Might up 100% of the time, which is important because that gives you 50% critical strike damage all of the time, on top of all of the other effects it gave you anyway. So this might actually be quite good now, and I imagine some people will probably try and use this. Nature's Furies has had it changed so that channel skills will now work with it. So that's good because obviously if they didn't work with it before, that kind of just ruled out one of the main ways that reasons you'd want to use Nature's Fury. And Stone Burst now works better with Nature's Fury in the sense that when it does get activated or procs when you're through the Nature's Fury key passive, the Stone Burst will charge all the way up to its maximum size and power before it explodes and does its damage, meaning that Stone Burst will probably be better with Nature's Fury now. Again, I don't know if that's going to be top tier build, mid tier build, low tier build, but it does sound like it will be at least better. So it might be one to try out. Moving on to uniques and aspects. The Wild Heart Hunger Boots, which are extremely popular on Druids, they have had the decay rate reduced by 4 times. That is a humongous buff. It means that the decay rate of the bonuses you get from it are going to come off it 4 times slower. So you're going to be able to keep that bonus up a lot more often. The new unique Gathlin's Birthright has had its duration increased by 50% from the PTR, which means, along with the fact that it now stacks faster, significantly faster when you critical strike, means the bonuses that you can keep up with this unique will just be much easier to get to the maximum stacks and much easier to keep them active. And this is the new build where they're pushing you towards a human style druid, and you go around and you do all sorts of damage based on these stacks that you get. Using both Nature's Fury and Earthen Might, I believe. So all of that all together is probably going to make that new build a pretty coherent build, and we'll have to see what people come up with. The aspect of Impending Deluge now makes all skills deal up to 50% multiplicative damage. This is the one that's related to Storm Strikes, allowing you to apply them across twice as many enemies. It used to just multiply the damage of the Storm Strikes, but now it's making all your skills deal up to 50% multiplicative damage over a period of time. So that means you can just use your Storm Strikes to activate that damage buff, and then you can go all in on another, probably stronger skill to do your main damage afterwards. So that actually sounds like it should be a pretty significant damage buff to a lot of different potential builds in Druid. Abundance and Gift of Stag are both related to Spirit here, which is your resource on Druid. Abundance is a passive, and it's just had the Spirit Generation increased on it. So if you've got Spirit Generation issues on your build, this will at least be useful to you, even if it's just early or in the midway of the journey, or maybe even in your endgame build if you can't solve it any other way. That is now available to you. The Gift of the Stag is one of the Spirit boons you get. It's one of the main class mechanics, and that has had the maximum Spirit reduced a little bit from 40 to 30. But the Spirit Generation has been increased again. So all in all, Spirit Generation should be a little bit easier on Druid, and that reduced in cap of Spirit probably won't hurt you too much in most builds on Druid. Next up is Necromancer. This one particularly excites me because I played this build back in the day. I haven't played it since then, and they've just buffed it, so it might make it a little bit nicer to play. Blood Lance is now going to apply its damage to every enemy around the one that you're attacking. So you can sit there and just attack your main enemy over and over and over again. And as you do that, it will spread through your aspects, but it'll also just damage all the enemies around it, just like it does on the main enemy. So that will give it some AoE effect, and it means you're not just funneled into a single target build that cannot kill stuff around it, which some builds do suffer from. So this will be really nice with Blood Lance. Blood Wave here was toned down a little bit in the PTR, rightfully so, I'd say, because it was a little bit OTT, as I'm pretty sure we'd all agree. But they did go very, very hard on the nerfs during the PTR, and it looks like that they've determined that it wasn't quite where they wanted it to be after that point, so they are slightly boosting damage again. Now, I do know that Bloodwave actually did okay in the PTR, but it wasn't doing, obviously, what it is in Season 7, which is just insta-blasting the whole game. So the chances are Bloodwave is still going to be quite good in Season 8. It will just be there will be other builds that can now compete against it. Bone Storm's had a slight damage increase. I've never seen just a pure Bone Storm build where Bone Storm is the main damage skill. I'm still not convinced this would make it do it, but it would make it a slightly better support skill, I suppose, and maybe someone will figure out how to make this good. We shall see. The Terror passive here is an interesting one because it has two elements to it in the current version. It gives you damage based on chilling or any of the slows or any of those kinds of crowd control effects, and then the second part, that allows you to get the same sort of damage boost, but based on if you've immobilized, frozen, or stunned an enemy. So if you go up against a boss, you'd never get either of these bonuses until you staggered them, for example. It means you'd end up in a situation where you're sitting there beating on a boss and you would only get these massive, massive bonuses that you're trying to get hold of for a very short window of time. What they've done is they've made the first pit just completely related to all crowd control effects. So you still got to crowd control something to get the bonus of damage from it, but that just means you can use any crowd control you like. So yes, on bosses, this will still have the same problems before. You are not going to be able to get them until you stagger them. But the second part is now completely related to just being on an elite or a boss. So those are not contingent on any condition. You can pretty much just go in, start blasting an elite or boss, and you're going to get that second part damage altogether. And when you stagger them, you'll get the full amount just like you did before. So this is a buff overall. It's just a bit semantical to get there. Vampiric Curse has had a slight buff in the sense that it is now regarded as a curse, as they mentioned in the campfire. And this is important because there are certain effects you can get based on hitting or dealing curse effects. So this is just going to unlock all of those with Vampiric Curse, which is very important for the new unique and the new build that Necromancer is using, because that sword and that unique will be applying Vampiric Curse to enemies all around you. So that means you can now link those together just a little bit easier. There's also some Paragon changes coming to Necromancer, some pretty big ones actually, and I think these are probably going to end up being used on a number of Necromancer builds, if not all Necromancer builds, because they're that strong at buffs. Flesh Eater was a legendary node in one of your boards, which meant that when you went around and consumed corpses, it would give you certain benefits. And as you would go around, it would continue consuming corpses, but it wouldn't reset your timer. So it means you'd end up in a situation sometimes where you've consumed all the corpses, you run out of your timer, and then you can no longer get your benefit from that again because until you go and find another corpse after that fact. What they've done now is they've made it that when you consume your corpse during that timer, it will refresh the timer. And that's really useful because that means it will make it a little bit easier to keep that up, if not 100% of the time, as near damn close to that as possible. The even more important buff to the Paragon here for Necromancer is the Scent of Death legendary node. Now, this is one that was used across a lot of builds anyway, but it did have some semantical differences to it, so people would use it for different reasons. This is the one where if you had no corpses near you, you'd get one benefit, and if you had two corpses or more near you, you'd get the other benefit. So it meant you end up in this situation where you'd only get one or the other, and it was very dependent on whether you had corpses near you, and it wouldn't necessarily give you the benefit you wanted because of that. What they've done is they've just stripped out the conditions, and they've just made it give you the flat 15% damage reduction that you got anyway, and a flat 30% multiplicative critical strike damage. So it's not giving you flat damage anymore. You've got to play into critical strike damage. But that is a humongous buff in the sense that you're just going to take this, you're going to get damage reduction, and you're going to get a massive critical strike damage boost here. So this will be very, very popular for Necromancer builds, I imagine. Uniques and aspects, the new Sangweaver Blade of Zir, the damage got buffed, the intelligence affix got buffed to be in comparative to other swords, two-handed swords, and it now only activates its souls, which it unleashes on activation when you use Army of the Dead. So they're clearly trying to push that through to being a unique where you use it with Army of the Dead. So if you take this unique now, you are going to play Army of the Dead. The aspects of Unholy Tether. This used to grant you Hindered. It now grants you Unstoppable. This is a massive buff because Hindered, or as good as it is, does not make you immune to crowd control effects. Unstoppable does. And they slightly increase the duration from 5 to 6 seconds, so it's just stronger altogether. This will be a popular choice for any Necromancer that's really struggling with being crowd controlled constantly. The aspect of Service and Sacrifice is another one of the new aspects, and this is the one where your Skeleton Warriors will run out and just go out and explode on when they die. And your mages get a huge amount of damage reduction, so you're pretty much making it so your mages are your main damage, and your skeleton warriors are just going out and blowing up and probably dealing some AoE damage for you. This damage buff just got straight increased, So this aspect is even stronger than what it was in the PTR. So I'll be very interested to see how people get on with this, because this is the new build they're trying to push for Necromancer. Rogue is next on the agenda. Shadow Clone is now going to be always considered a cutthroat skill. You no longer need to put 5 points in it to get that bonus. For some people, that's going to be very important if they want to use Shadow Clone, because it means they only have to put 1 point in there, and then they can get all the cutthroat bonuses built into it without having to use all those passive points. Death Trap is a significant victim of this patch. It has been nerfed quite significantly. They did say during the campfire that they reckon when people get very, very, very high tier gear and they've got all of the stuff in the end game, that you should probably be able to get it back to the same point it was before. But we'll have to wait and see, because the main thing about Death Trap that made it feel good, I played this in Season 7, is that you could get to a situation where you could permanently just cast Death Trap over and over and over again. And if you can't do that, Death Trap does not deal all that much damage in the grand scheme of things. It does a lot in one hit, but you can't build up all the damage it can do unless you can cast it over and over again. What they've done is they've increased the cooldown. They've reduced the amount you can reduce that cooldown through its activations and effects. And they've also made one of its sub-effects, Prime Death Trap, they've reduced its damage by about 60%, from a 50% multiplicative increase to 20%. So overall, they have nerfed the damage. They've made it so it's got a longer cooldown, and they've made it so it's harder to get its cooldown down to low enough so that you can keep it up permanently. So we'll have to see how this plays. I hope that Death Trap doesn't get completely nuked here, and it can still be used, but it's going to be a lot harder to get to that point, so bear that in mind if you are thinking of playing that build. Items and tempering. The Scoundrel's levers were bugged during the PTR, or at least they read as bugged. It no longer applies to Cortac to grenade skills. I think that was one of the things that people thought was bugged. I think they've just decided, no, that's how we want it to work. It just read wrong. And they've also, more importantly, they removed the bit which makes you travel to the Death Trap during the time when it's cast. So they've obviously decided they don't want it to work that way anymore, and that means you haven't got that traversal kind of ability during that unique ability. It just casts you the Death Trap. It does the extra parts of the unique ability instead of that now. Trap expertise here was removed from the offensive category during the tempering scrolls, and it's now been moved to the utility category. So that means all of your trap expertise tempers you can now put on your rings, you can put on your boots, you can put it on your pants, so you can put it on anywhere where utility can go. Amulet as well. So this could mean you've unlocked a lot of places where you couldn't put trap expertise before, and they were colliding with other things you wanted. So this will potentially make it so you can build out some of your builds a bit easier now. And this probably counters some of the nerfs that have just come in. Sorcerer, next one up. One of my favorite classes. From a high level, I do think that Sorcerer is going to probably be one of the lower classes this season. They were one of the best in the PTR. All of the burning stuff you could get was absolutely cracked. I think they'll still be okay, but I don't think these are going to be top tier. I think you'll see Lightning Spear will still be very good. Ice Shards should be better than it was. All of the burning stuff should be okay, but without that massive Andariel's buff and all of the other nerfs they've put across the board, you'll probably find that they're not going to be blasting quite the same as they were in PTR. But that being said, Ice Shards is apparently going to be better against close enemies. That was one of the issues. It spawned too far in front of you, so if you're like right in front of an enemy, it wouldn't hit them. Apparently they're making it spawn behind you now, so it will always hit people in front of you. So that's a nice quality of life increase. Familiar casts faster, so it should be easier to just keep those up and keep those buffs up without having to sit there and stand there casting familiars for days one after the other. And Avalanche, this is an interesting one for me, because they were trying to position this like they've made Avalanche this almighty buff, but honestly, from my reading on it, it's not that much of a buff, because Avalanche, what they've done is they've made it so it just gives you flat mana reduction now, instead of it being lucky hit based. But the problem with Avalanche was that the damage on it did not compare to other key passives when you came down to it, and they haven't actually changed the damage on it. They've only made it so it gives you flat mana reduction. So this will make it easier to solve your mana situation for sure, and in conjunction with the aspects, as we'll see in a moment, it makes it even easier. You're going to basically solve your mana problems, but the damage is still the same, so you're still going to hit the same damage ceiling. But overall, it will play nicer. It'll be a lot easier to use this. It will not at least be an obvious just write-off. But I still think some of the other key aspects are probably going to be more favourable here. Uniques and aspects, the Hail of Thurglass, it is the new unique helm, which is used for ice shards. Now, I personally think this shouldn't be a helm. It probably should have been gloves or something, because the problem with this is it now rules out a significant number of the mythic uniques which sorceresses tend to use. You know, Air of Perdition, the Shaco, and so on. Like, without those, you're losing a significant amount of power, but they have now at least added cooldown reduction to it and removed the maximum life. So that does make it a little bit nicer. Means you're not losing just all of the cooldown reduction that the Shaco would give you, but the Air of Perdition damage is still going to be a massive hit here. So I think that's where one of the issues in Ice Shards will come down to if you want to use that helm. The Shivering aspects, it had its damage increase. This is the one where it does more damage based on how much chilled an enemy is. So that should be nice. We'll also have to see how many people choose to use it. It has got a very high ceiling on it now, but it will just require you to deal damage based on how much they're chilled. So on bosses, it also works on how much they're staggered as opposed to them being staggered. So it will start off with no benefit, and as they get nearer to being staggered, it will do more damage. The aspects of the Frozen Tundra, Glacial aspects, and the aspects of Frozen Wake are potentially the area where I think maybe sorceresses will get a pretty good build going, and that is the Ice Spikes build, potentially maybe Blizzard Ice Spikes, because all of these are now going to scale off of their respective skills, Deep Freeze, Blizzard, and Ice Armor. So that means the base Ice Spikes values that would never scale their base value, meaning they could never compete, will now scale with the ranks. What we don't know is how much they will scale by. So if they scale enough, the Ice Spikes build with the Blue Rose unique might be very, very good. So that might be one of the builds to look out for here. If that ends up being much better than I think it's going to be, then maybe sorceresses are back in contention here, along with Lightning Spear and such. We'll have to see. Paragon and Tempering. They made a pretty significant change to Enchantment Master. This will be interesting because it will give some people some questions. They changed this recently so it was more usable by giving you generic damage buffs based on the enchants you had. They've now made it so that each enchant will give you 30% damage to its respective element. And then if they're both the same element, they will give an extra 20% on top. They've buffed the 30% to 40% in this since the PTR. And on top, as I say, they'll give you another 20% each based on how the other one is. So overall, you can end up with 120% damage increase here if you use two enchants of the same element. Now, this is an issue for some people if you play an ice build and you want an ice enchant, because a lot of people tend to use the teleport enchant so that they can evade and get around the map super fast. But if you do that, you're going to lose 40% damage, theoretically. That's how I read it. So we'll have to see how this ends up playing and whether it's worth it. More importantly, and this is another reason Sorks are probably going to be hurting this season, one of the new mechanics they added in the PTR to scale damage on Sorks was picking up your static charges on the floor, and you can go around and use the convulsion skill, convulsion ranks to scale it. You've got 5% damage for each one of those you picked up, the little lightning balls on the floor. And everyone was just building so you could keep at least one of those active at all times so you could get the full benefit of convulsions. Now, they have now removed the tempering recipe that allows you to scale your ranks of convulsions. Similar to how they did on Spiritborn, they removed a recipe there to do the same in the past. And they've replaced that with static discharge. So that is a significant decrease in the amount of damage you can get from Convulsion now, because that means you can't scale the ranks in Convulsion above probably 4. 1 with your Shroud of False Death, and 3 with points in there to start with. So that is another significant nerf to Sorcerers, unfortunately, but it does mean that a lot of builds will now not play this clunky playstyle, trying to pick up all of these little lightning balls on the floor all the time. That did create a bit of a playstyle which wasn't particularly fun to play, but you did it because it was such a big damage increase. So we'll have to see what effect that has as well. All in all, Sorceresses got hit pretty hard by the PTR nerfs, I'd say, everyone. I guess we kind of expected some of them, but I was expecting potentially bigger buffs in the class to be able to rectify and sort of like compensate from the lack of damage that we were gaining from boss powers, because honestly, Sorks have been behind for a fair while now. There's one class-wide change here in Tempering. Elemental Finesse Day and Elemental Finesse Night have been added. So we're now going to be able to temper fire, physical, lightning, cold, poison, and shadow damage onto our gear again. So this is something I think we had in the past, and they have now added it so we can do it as a class-wide thing. So there will be builds that will benefit from this. We don't know what the numbers are here or how high they'll go, so they may be very good. They might not be as good as some others, but it's worth knowing that those will be there because they are a new thing as part of the tool, and there might be some builds that will scale off of these, such as sorceresses have a way of scaling their vulnerable damage in their Frigid Finesse board based on how much cold damage you've got. Now, you can normally cap that anyway, but you've got another way to be able to do this now, for example. Moving on, it's important to know 2 of the rune words have been slightly modified from the PTR as well. One of them is the Zam rune. This is the one that gives you the guaranteed critical and overpower. This is pretty significant because they've removed it so that if you overflow it, it will not do extra damage anymore. It will give you an extra duration, and they've also increased the base duration of it. Now, this means that you're going to be able to keep the effects of Zan up probably a lot more active than before, but you're just not going to be able to get the ceiling of damage way higher than it's intended to do, like people were doing before. So I guess they're trying to remove the whole concept of snapshotting this rune and also abusing the damage you could get from it. The second one is the tech one. This is another place where Earthquake Barbs have been hit. The Earthquake damage here has been reduced by about 30% overall. So this means that Earthquake Barbs have taken a second hit here. But I still think Earthquake Barbs are probably going to be quite good. They were just really good before. So this overall is probably just bringing them down in line. We'll have to see how much of an effect that really truly has in comparison to other builds. We've had a few system changes. A lot of these were mentioned in the campfire. The Conduit Shrine, that's just gone. It may come back in future, but they said that's just clearly not working the way they want it to right now. I mean, I had this happen to me. I'd pick it up and I'd be sitting there and I'd be like, damn, I didn't want to pick that up. I've got to sit here for 30 seconds now until it's gone because I can't do any damage. So for now, they've obviously decided they haven't had time to figure out how to make that how they want it to be. So they've just flat removed it. So we won't have to worry about those, at least for the time being. Ancestral Whispers, which were really good in Season 7. You would occasionally get a Whisper, guaranteed Ancestral. They are carrying on, and it probably sounds like they're going to carry on going forward. So that's a really nice addition that's staying in. Obel Gambler, which was absolutely wrenchingly underwhelming in Season 7. It really was terrible. They say it's massively buffed. They say when you fill your inventory in the endgame, it should fill up with significantly more legendaries, and you should see ancestrals from this. If that's the case, it will be nearest what Season 6 was, and for all intents and purposes, the Obel Gambler felt pretty good in Season 6. In fact, it was probably too good in Season 6, which is why they nerfed it so hard. But if it's somewhere in the middle, it should feel a lot better than it has been, because it was pretty dire in Season 7. And this is why I always had a little bit of a point of contention. I'm glad they've done this because with the new progression, even with the changes they've made, I thought that glyph leveling could be very difficult for some people if you can't get to anywhere close to Pit 100. Now, to put it in context, on the PTR, a Pit 100 boss had about 200 to 500 trillion HP. Now, they say they've reduced that. But if it's still got in very high levels of HP, say high hundreds of billions, there'll be a lot of people who can't do that very easy to start with. And if you needed to be within 10 ranks of that to be able to even level your glyphs, you were stuck in this vicious cycle of never being able to do it unless you were carried. So they've made it so your glyphs are going to be you can level them up within 50 pit ranks, but the percentage will start at 1%. And they say it's going to double every 10 upwards. So 2% at 40, 4% at 30, 8% at 20, 16 at 10. And then I guess it'll probably start scaling quicker when you get to about that point. Actually, within 10 ranks, it will probably be a bit higher. And then it will start getting to the point where it's near 100% when you're at your rank or slightly above it. So this just makes it a little bit more accessible, gives you at least some chance of leveling them up, even if it is very small, to incentivize you to still play and not necessarily struggle bus it all the way through. Further system changes. The leveling speed is apparently going to be faster than the PTR, but slower than Season 7. I think this is good. Season 7 was just too fast, in my opinion, but it was a lot slower in the PTR, so I think somewhere in the middle is probably a sensible place to start. We'll see how that goes. If it still feels too fast, they can always bring it down again next time, right? Pit scaling has also been reduced in strength, which is good because, as I said, the pit scaling was absolutely mental. And with the boss power, without the boss powers, no one would have got anywhere near to pit 100, not a single build. So since they've nerfed most of those, no one would be getting anywhere near to pit 100 without this change. So they've made it easier than PTR, but harder than the Season 7, which again is probably the right way to go. We probably should not be having people smashing pit 150 within 1 or 2 days of the season. It should be an aspirational thing if people can even get there to start with. So hopefully that will give people a little bit more to chew on, to try and compete against each other, to see who can get the highest, and so on and so on. The season journey's been overhauled a little bit, so it's going to be slightly different now. Ashes are no longer going to be earned during the battle pass. They are going to be earned during your season journey. It's got a new UI, new objectives, and some of the objectives are going to be linked to Torment 4, but I think with the decrease in difficulty and all of these other changes, it probably will be viable to do them all, so I wouldn't threat too much about this. But this should be interesting. It will give you more incentivization to actually go do your season journey. And honestly, it was just a tick box exercise for me in previous seasons. I would just do whatever I did by playing the game, and eventually at some point I would then go through and just complete them all just to get them done. But I had no real incentive particularly to do it. With the Ashes behind it, it does incentivize you to actually focus on these are the objectives I should go and do, and hopefully they're not going to be really monotonous to do. We'll have to see. Last but not least, we've got the Reliquary. This is the new feature they've got where you can choose what rewards you're going to unlock rather than having to go through your battle pass from level 1 up to level 90, and then you just get given your rewards at whichever level they happen to be at. This means you can earn favor tokens by killing monsters or completing activities during the season. They cap at 99, so you have to spend them when you get to 99, and then you can go into one of your categories and you can choose whatever rewards you want that's part of that category. Now, a disclaimer, those categories are locked behind battle passes. They do have a new premium battle pass, so that means some of these may be also locked behind there. But it does mean that if you've only got a select few rewards that you're interested in, then you can use those tokens to unlock those specific rewards, and then you don't have to worry about completing your battle pass to be able to get those few rewards that you might be interested in. It also means that they can, in theory, produce and give us more Reliquary categories per season, or add them during the seasons as well, giving us more incentive to try and unlock cosmetics and rewards as we go through. Another important thing to know about this is if you do complete all of your Reliquary categories, you can carry on gaining these favor tokens up to 99, and those will carry over to next season. And that's really nice because that means when you start the next season, you're just going to be able to go and buy a few of those rewards straight away and give you a little bit of a head start. And another nice thing as well, and this is something we've seen in other games before, is if you complete an entire category, you get a bonus reward which costs you no favor. You just get that for completing the category. So that incentivizes you to try and complete the whole set as well. So that's everything I've got for you today, guys. Those are the important bits I thought you might be interested in, but I'll link the presentation in the description down below, along with the patch notes. So if you want to check those out in full, I would recommend you do so. I'll be live on Twitch and YouTube over the next few days covering the game. So if you want to come and jump in and discuss there, or if you want to just leave a comment in the comment section down below, I'll try and get back to all of you as soon as I can. And until then, guys, hope to see you there. Much love. Keep safe.